Well, hello and welcome to another round of Ray's Boom Boom Room. I'm your host, Ray Mancini, here with my ace corner man, cut man, everyday man, Mike Case. And we got a very special show today. This is one of the few shows I haven't been excited about this show, maybe of any show we've done yet, Mike.
You're not the only one.
And
I mean, everybody in this room is pretty geeked right now. And our guest is geeked too. You can totally tell.
I just met him. He's an author. He's a scientist, researcher, lecturer. I'm gonna let him tell you what it is. 'Cause I don't want to mess it up. What is it exactly that you do it all?
Yeah.
But Ray Szymanski, and
From the Dayton area.
from Dayton.
Made
Yes,
the trip up here to hang with us.
And where were you born and raised? Were you born in that area?
I was born in
Detroit. You were saying.
I was born in the Polish community of Hamtramck, Michigan.
Yeah, you were saying Detroit, large Italian Polish community.
Yes, very, very large. I grew up mostly with a 50-50 split, Italians and Polish people.
Yeah, it's large. In this Youngstown, we have a large, Italian, Slovakian communities and stuff it's very similar. I'm not gonna try to explain what you do exactly. I'm gonna let Mike take over and ask the questions.
Okay.
But just sitting there talking to you, I have questions I will ask intermediately, and well, I'm gonna let you say exactly what you do, because to say that you are
Well, it's about UFOs.
UFOs. Okay, yes,
That's the topic
I should have clarified
today.
The topic is
If you don't
UFOs.
know.
Whether you believe it or not, I just let me clarify. I am a believer. I'm a believer, and as I was telling Ray, to think that we in this world of this great big galaxy out there, to think we're the only living species, the only living things, is pretty naive. Pretty naive, I think, to think that. And I think it's been proven several times over and over. And Ray's going to debunk any of those people who think that it's all just government made-up stories and things like that. But, Ray, you have some fascinating stories just the little time we were talking. So I'm going to let Mike take over, and I'm going to jump in when I have any questions.
All right, so I'll just put it into a nutshell, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. The Roswell, the place they call Roswell, the Roswell crash that people talk about, supposedly an alien ship crashed in Roswell, New Mexico back in the 40s, and they trucked the wreckage. The government got there first, got the area roped off or whatever, and then trucked the wreckage to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio.
Just a small correction.
Okay.
It was flown on a B-29
Oh, okay.
to Wright-Patterson. It actually was taken from Roswell Army Airfield in 1947. It was flown to the Dallas-Fort Worth Fort Worth area where the 8th Army Air Corps headquarters was. It was taken there for examination. Parts of it were flown to Washington, D.C. for the Air Force Chief of Staff to see, but the majority was then flown to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
And what's Ray's connection? Well, as a kid in college, you got a job at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, right?
That's correct. I started in 1973.
As a scientist.
That is correct.
And tell folks what happened on your very first day.
I had a mentor. I was assigned to a mid-level engineer who I can only identify as Al. And
Really?
And I'll explain why if we have time. So Al says, hey, we're going to cut through this hangar and go to the business office that's connected on the other side. And it's the greasy spoon, he called it. We're going to show you the coffee shop. So it's my very first week. And we step from our building, which is a mirror image of the building on the far side of the hangar. And we step into this hangar that's dark. It's misused, unused at the time. And we step in, and he turns to me and said, by the way, have you heard about our aliens? Now, I'm an engineering student from the University of Detroit, and I know nothing about aliens. So I look at him and I go, huh, what? He goes, yeah, there was a crash out in 1947, and he called it their occupants and their machines to the base for examination and exploitation. And I looked at him like the deer in the headlights, and I said, really, tell me more. And he said, well, they keep them in the tunnels. Now, it's another revelation. I go, we have tunnels?
So under the ground, he said.
Yeah, tunnels. We have tunnels. I said, they keep them in tunnels. I said, well, can we go see these aliens in the tunnels? And then he says, well, no. I said, well, why not? He goes, well, it's a secret. Well, geez, Al, if it's a secret, how do you know? And he goes, well, everybody knows. And I think what he was referring to was the fact that Project Blue Book had been there for 22 years, and it was the Air Force UFO investigation. Well, this is 4 years after Blue Book had closed. So there's a couple decades of history of Wright-Patterson and UFOs and all the television shows that it spawned. So pretty much the whole community knew that there was a connection there, and now he's taking me the next step, saying these things are on the base.
Okay. Did you believe him?
I was stunned.
As a scientist, I mean, you're someone, empirical evidence is key, right?
Well, at the time I was a student. I really didn't have many years.
What was that word? Empirical?
Isn't that that's
empirical?
Yeah.
Did you
physical
make that up?
evidence?
Did you learn that word?
No.
Because I don't think Mike knew what
That's a
empirical.
thing.
Mike ain't never gonna know what that word is unless you told him, Ray.
Ray, tell him the truth. That's a real thing in science.
It
right?
is.
Empirical evidence is evidence you can see.
I'm learning a new. That's great. Empirical.
You know what? It was almost over my head too, so don't worry about it, Ray. I was pretty shocked, and what I did with that information, though, is as I got to meet more people during that first 90-day period and got to trust them, what I did is I kind of asked them the question. I go, tell me about the aliens on the base. And they would go, yeah, we all know about that. Because they were kind of proud that Blue Book was there and it was international publicity and that kind of thing. So, that alien stuff came from Roswell to Wright-Patterson really got cemented in about 1978. Now, that's several years later. But the fact that there was that connection that the community knew about, that was palpable. So we all knew about it.
Another big word. Thanks a lot.
That would I knew more.
So then you start, I mean, are you just kind of banking this in your mind, or are you doing research on it, or what are you doing?
Well, I'm initially banking this, but I'm talking to everybody. And every time I get a chance, I'm always, I'm in a meeting room or I'm taken to a new building somewhere for a meeting or to do whatever. I'm always like peeking around the corner wondering, could that door go to a tunnel? Or I'm asking the individuals who might be, the best people were the building managers, because they knew what everything was. And I could get a rumor dispelled by talking to them, or, maybe sometimes, oh yeah, we'll just take you there. We'll just show you. There's steam tunnels and they connect the two buildings. So mostly that was the kind of thing that I saw, but I read everything that I could get my hands on. And so that interest continued through all the years.
I mean, as a scientist, most scientists, correct me if I'm wrong, usually is scientific proof, logic, proof. When you do experiments, okay, this can be explained most of the time. So when you have these theories out there or illogical explanations, you either open to it or you're not, and obviously you were. And that's what I tell people. I've read books since about this stuff for a long time. And I think, and after my own comprehension, me going, it's got to be real. There's enough people out there. They're not all crazy. There's some crazy people, I'm sure. Some people want attention, but they're not logical people, business people who are in the right frame of mind, sensible people, but that have come and usually it comes out that people try to discredit them. And am I mistaken or show them as illogical?
Well, if you're a debunker, and debunkers can be paid by government, they can be paid by an agency that has an interest that's non-government, a company. But when you look at a debunker, that's like, don't bother me. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind is made up, sort of thing. And then what they'll do is you'll notice they'll never discredit the evidence because they can't, because it takes science to do that. What they'll do is they'll discredit the source. And you can tell immediately that you have a debunker on your hands rather than a skeptic. Now, a skeptic will be open to an answer that is the right answer, but a debunker is trying to steer you away. Right. And unfortunately, there have been many famous debunkers out there who have made anyone who reports a UFO a lunatic.
Right.
But let's just take a case that I think is one of the best cases ever, and that's Travis Walton. I got to spend the better part of a day with Travis Walton at the site of his event.
Where does he live?
Travis Walton lives in Snowflake, Arizona. And in 1975, he was in a truck with 6 other loggers, and their job was to clear swaths of land through the Apache Sitgreaves Forest. Now, the reason they did that is a fire break. If there's 10 million acres out there, dry season happens. If a fire breaks out and the wind's trying to sweep it over, there's a fire break, maybe several acres that there's no woods, there's no tinder. So their job was to cut these lines through the forest and get rid of what they called it slash. They were returning home, I think it was the 5th of November, 1975. About 6 o'clock, they saw what they thought was a forest fire. So they were heading home towards the Mogollon Rim Road, and they went to inspect because their Their livelihood depends on this. Well, they got there, they got within 100 feet or so, and what they all saw, all 7 occupants of that truck, was a 30-foot wide hovering silver UFO, about 15 feet off the ground. They all saw it. Travis Walton was near a door, swung it open, got out, and ran towards it while they were all yelling, "Travis, get back here, you crazy SOB." Didn't do any good. So he stood there looking at it for several minutes. They were all screaming at him. When he stood up to leave, there was a static discharge from this craft. It was described as a white-blue light. It hit Travis, picked him up 10 feet, and blew him back 10 feet. The occupants of that truck thought he was dead, so they slammed the door shut, and they drove down about a half hour. They got a half hour away and said, "Oh, my God," when the sheriff finds out that we didn't come back with Travis,
I think we killed him.
we're the last 6 guys to see him alive. So they went back to find him. He was gone. The story goes on. 5 days later, Travis is returned by the people who took him aboard the spaceship to heal him. But they were smart enough to drop him near a phone booth. Click, click, click. Back in 75 or 75, you click the receiver. He called his relatives and said, "This is Travis. I'm here in Heber. I'm next to this gas station." They went out and found him. He had a 5-day growth. He was gone for 5 days. There had been the largest manhunt ever in the state of Arizona that could not find Travis. But the key to that story is each one of those people, including Travis, have each been through several lie detector tests and have all passed with flying colors. When they talk to people who do this for the living, the best lie detectorists in the world, or whatever they call them, polygraph administrators, they said the case is rock solid. The odds of them all answering these questions all correctly and all passing with flying colors is astronomical. It is beyond question what they describe as happening.
Now, did Travis, did he say, could he remember anything?
Travis wrote a 300-page book about it. It is.
So he remembers.
He had conscious memories of it. He definitely had conscious memories of a lot of it, which is really interesting because most abductees do not. But I think he was an accidental abductee. He just, had he not gotten out of the car, those guys would have gone home for the evening. But because he got out, and who knows what they were doing there, refueling, resting their spaceship, grabbing a deer. I don't know why the ship was up there.
But what does he say? What does he say in his book that he remembers? Alien form, or does he remember life form of what they look like or anything like that?
He calls them creatures. He describes most of them as being very ugly, very large heads. When you translate his words to what we know today and what's being described by other contactees, it would be your typical gray, 3 feet, 4 feet tall, that were buzzing around. He was in a gelatinous substance for several days because he was basically burnt over 100% of his body. He knew how badly he was burnt. He has conscious memories of that when he was hit by that white-blue beam initially. And initially he thought that he was taken aboard the ship because he was going to be an abductee, a contactee. But he realizes later years, it took him many years to come to this, that he was taken aboard the ship to heal. Had they left him there, he would have died. Right. But it took 5 days of their advanced medicine. And Travis told me on that trip, which was really interesting, we went up to that site because Jen Stein did a movie called Travis. And I met Jen, and I was at the conference, and I told her I was going to shoot photos for just my own edification. And she said, "Hey, I know a person that can help you find that." And I already told her, I could probably find it. And I was, I got somebody. Next thing I know, she's going, "Travis, get over here." And Travis was just standing a few feet away. Travis comes over. He says, "Now, Travis, I want you and Ray to go to the site. He's going to shoot some photographs. You show him those tree stumps, and we're going to integrate those photographs into the movie Travis." And that's what happened. So Travis and I went up there for the day. I learned more about his real incident, his book, how he wrote it, why he wrote it, everything that happened. So for me, looking into the man's eyes, hearing him tell me at the site that it all happened, and hearing the timbre of his voice and everything, and literally being able to cross-examine him for the better part of a day, there's no doubt in my mind that he believes what happened to him and everything those guys reported.
No, you say he believes it, but he believes it. They saw it, so next year we believe it as fact.
the legal system believes it too. I mean, they were investigated. Sheriffs, everyone came in, FBI, whoever could investigate the case investigated it, and everybody walked away went, this is as good as it gets.
Couldn't debunk it.
Nice.
Not only couldn't debunk it, but if you read, I think I said his book was 300 pages, maybe 400. The last 100 pages of Travis's book called Fire in the Sky,
I was just going to ask you that. Okay,
called
fine.
Fire in the Sky, he spends debunking the debunkers, especially a guy by the name of Philip Klass, who was an evil SOB. Who they discovered was an intelligence agent most of his career. He did everything he could to get the story debunked, and Travis takes that debunking, he takes it apart in 100 pages in one of the most brilliantly written exposés of debunkers ever. So I tell everybody, after you buy my books, get Travis's book.
I want to ask you about your book because you were telling me the reason you got into this a little bit was to actually poke holes in their stories, right? As a scientist, you wanted to see if these UFO stories were fact or fiction in your mind, right?
That's correct.
Then I'll ask you a little more about this book too.
Yeah, I went on a personal quest. At that point, it was 1997. The Phoenix Lights happened, and Luke Air Force Base. This happened in Phoenix, Arizona, and Luke Air Force Base, which is just outside the airport there, they scrambled several jets, and at that point, the Air Force said, "Well, here's what the story was. What the people saw was a bunch of A-10s dropping flares on the range. There was a test group out of Maryland that was there. Well, it turns out that explanation could only cover maybe 1% of all the sightings that happened across the state over that several-hour period. Yeah, okay, fine. That covers 30 minutes of a 24-hour story." They scrambled the jets, and Luke Air Force Base then started to pump out the debunker story. It was these flares. So what several of us did who worked for the Air Force is they used a public affairs official as they would, and we had the global email list. So we could just look this guy up on the global and send him a question like, "Hey, we saw this thing that you did, and we'd like to talk to you." Well, of course, they were only going to do the public thing. So we knew he was blowing smoke. And after a while, we just start sending him emails. "Dude, you're sending out BS. You're embarrassing me with these stories connected to the Air Force. I can no longer tell people I work for the Air Force because now I'm embarrassed that you're putting out these stupid stories." And we never got a response, of course. But because we had the Air Force Global, we could just go, "Dude, this is BS." And so we did that for a few days, and then we didn't want to get arrested. And there were a couple of us doing it. We just let it go. There's nothing else you could do. But that's what got me doing the field research then. I go, I know they're blowing smoke.
Yeah.
I want to go out and find the truth myself. I can no longer depend on really anybody or anything. And that's when I did my research.
And you found that the stories that you heard from the big crashes or wrecks or whatever they were in your mind true stories, right?
I investigated 3 major stories: Exeter, New Hampshire, 1965, Rendlesham Forest, 1980.
That's in England.
And England, and the southeast coast of England. And then Travis Walton, which happened in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest, about 10 miles south of Heber, Arizona. And I went out to poke holes in these stories, and over a several-year investigation, the exact opposite happened. I got to talk to many of the principals who were involved in it, including the Air Force guys who actually were witnesses to this. As I said, I spent the day with Travis, and I found some people who were witnesses to the Exeter incident. And as I went along, I found out that not only couldn't I shake the story, I was gathering moss like a rolling stone. I was finding more and more information.
So get back to your book. You write the book, 50 Shades of Grays. This is about your time in Dayton at the Air Force Base?
The first book is called 50 Shades of Grays, Evidence of Extraterrestrial Visitation to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
I held up the wrong book.
Yeah, that's the first book.
Okay.
And that examines Exeter, Rendlesham, and Travis Walton, and the last chapter is all about Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
What'd you find at Wright-Pat did you, I thought I saw something on TV, maybe a secretary had seen something and still worked there. Was there 1 or 2 people you interviewed that really, you were like, yep, these guys know what they're talking about? They had hung around that long.
I actually didn't interview anybody that made the cut of the book because it was secondhand or third hand, and there was no way to basically validate that information. And I wanted to make sure that I could dig this all the way to bedrock and see if I believed it, I might publish it. If I couldn't believe it. So those second and third hand stories are really difficult. So what I did is I started snooping on the base in earnest. And one of the things that I wanted to look at is my theory, if we had alien bodies at Wright-Patterson, and I know that some of them that were brought there were deceased, they didn't survive the crashes. But we also had rumors that we brought live bodies through. So I wanted to know, if it's 1947, put myself in 1947, where would we bring those bodies? Where would we examine them, live or dead? So what I discovered is that we had the Air Force Regional Hospital at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in 1947, which was Building 219. And I said, well, why don't I start there? Let me check the history of Building 219. So I did. And in fact, what I discovered is that I found a map of 1947. And I will tell your audience that I have had a little help. There are people who used to work at the base and people who still continue to work at base that will occasionally drop breadcrumbs that I follow. And in this case, gentleman gave me the right maps that had Building 219 on it. I verified by the legend that 219 was the regional hospital. It says so on the map's legend. Well, it just so happens that Building 219 is the home of the Air Force Museum, and I hope they'll forgive me for this, but the Air Force Marathon. I said museum, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm a photographer for the Air Force Marathon. And so when I go to visit, I
see where this is going.
Mike is getting ahead of me, but he's a detective. So I go in there and I go, I'm going to snoop around Building 219. So I have my meeting with the Air Force.
Which used to be a hospital.
Which used to be the regional hospital. Why that's important is it would have been the place where aliens, dead or alive, would have been processed. So it's a good place to start. Is there anything residual there? So I get into 219, I pick up my credentials, say hi to everybody. I bring them the traditional box of granola bars because they're always eating, they're all runners, and say hello and we chat. And I get my instructions for the next assignment, which is I cover everything for the marathon, the expo, the breakfast, the race. I run parts of the race. So now I'm snooping, and I've got my camera. So I go down to the basement where the morgue used to be, snap, snap. I find the vault where if they would have had aliens overnight, they would have locked them up in the vault, most likely. Mm-hmm. And I opened the vault door. I didn't know, the lock was now gone, but that would have been the place that would have stored them. It was right there next to the morgue, and I'm shooting pictures. There's 2 blood stains, what look like blood stains on the floor of the morgue, which is interesting. I opened the door thinking, I don't know what's behind this vault door. It could be anything. Turns out it was full of styrofoam cups and coffee. Well, you've got an Air Force, you've got to run on something.
Yeah.
So I did some more snooping, and I did some more research. It turns out that for 10 years, the Foreign Technology Division, those people responsible for processing the Roswell crash wreckage, they had offices in Building 219. So there's literally the people who were responsible. I think they were like, say, 52 to 62. They had offices in there. Now, that's a historical piece of information. Why that building? There's 600 plus buildings at Wright-Pat.
Yeah.
Why would you have temporary housing in a building that would have been the place where possibly the aliens would have been processed to? There is a connection there that I'm still trying to piece together. Mm-hmm. It turns out there are newspaper articles printed in the base newspaper that claim doctors, nurses, officers, administrators through the decades that have had offices in there have reported a long continuing list of paranormal activity. To this day, I have a photograph. I don't know, it makes my current talks. Not sure I put it in the first book. There's a photograph on the door that documents to this day. People will leave the building, go out, stretch, get a little bit of sunshine, come back. The door's locked behind them. They will lock the doors at night. The doors will be open in the morning. They will close all of the windows. Some of the windows will be open. There's a story there of a group of attorneys that have met there. And while they were in the meeting, they heard children's voices. When they came out, there was no children. So the building that I think brought the aliens through in 1947 has had a continuing string of paranormal experiences from the beginning. So I think that's more interesting to the reader, to somebody who's doing research, is to try to bring these facts that nobody's ever brought forward before, rather than talk to somebody who was third hand, who had a plumber friend who thinks he saw aliens.
Right. But that could be just people that died in the hospital rather than anything to do with the aliens, right?
Absolutely, but the aliens could have died in that hospital too.
Yeah. Do you think, let me ask you this, do you think that, a lot of people say that the metals and the alloys that we have today, some of the very, very lightweight, super strong metals that all of a sudden we created are from some of the materials that they think are on crashed UFOs. Would you agree with that?
Nitinol is one of them.
What's that?
Nitinol is a material where they can roll it into sheets, and when you grab it and you compress it and you let it go, it basically returns to its original format. And that was one of the key descriptions that anybody who was interviewed that handled that material gave. In fact, Jesse Marcel, Major Jesse Marcel, he was the first Air Force guy to handle it. Day after it was reported in Roswell, he and another intelligence officer, Sheraton Cavett, drove the 70 miles north. They got pieces of the metal. In fact, they picked up thousands of pieces, thousands. The biggest piece, they said, was 2 foot by 3 foot, but thousands of them were 2 inches by 3 inches. And they handled it, and they said one of the unusual properties was we could squeeze it, and it would just come right back.
And it's a metal.
It's a metal. He said we tried to burn it, cut it, smash it, and we could not do anything to it. We could not change it. And the most unusual thing is we would crumble it up, drop it on the table, and it would just spread right back out. And that is equivalent to what we find in the metal called nitinol today, which could be a reverse engineer of what they found. But could we have reverse engineered things from the carcass? Absolutely. Do I believe it? Absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, I was
I
gonna
have
say-
another question
Yeah, I
afterwards.
was going to say, right. You know, there's a lot of movies coming out about extraterrestrial stuff and things like that. People writing books, and we're obviously, you know, they're the smartest people in Hollywood, so they got to get the information somewhere. But these people write, a lot of it is fictional stuff that they're assuming, or but again, a lot of it is very close to what is fact. How do you think these people have come out just from things they heard, or things they created, imagining? Oh man, isn't that a coincidence?
Or is anything any close to what you believe is a real event?
There are no coincidences. Let me say that with respect to this.
Yeah.
I have always felt by watching the Spielberg, the stuff he put out,
Yeah.
that he has tapped into a source.
Yes. I
Like
agree.
Close Encounters, like that kind of thing?
There's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah.
Things that
There's a source that writes the
he's
material.
got a source that says, okay,
Because there's no way he could make that up.
you could make it up, but the fact is that it came out so early in the game. Now anybody can do what Spielberg has done through the years. His series like Taken, for example, it is so close on the mark that as I watch the stuff, I go, he's tapped into a source. I don't know who it is, but you know, it's the guys like who did Watergate, right? You know, they had their source. They had their and who was it? He's like, you know, second in command of the FBI or whatever, who was the Watergate source. To me, I feel that Spielberg has that, and no one can convince me otherwise. So to answer your question, I think some of these people are tapped in, and we don't find out about it until 10 years later, 20 years later.
Because you know there some of these just because so many of the stories now with the now they try to make them, a lot of them, you know, it was just about the extraterrestrial or the connection between outer space and, you know, Earth, the people living here on Earth, civilian life. But now there's a lot of them, then they take it, some will take it left, make it a horror project, some will take it at different avenues will take it. Has there been any research or any stories about these so-called extraterrestrials or the people who've met them, that they actually were nasty and cruel or done nasty things? I mean, has there been any of those type of stories?
That's a really good question. In fact, my second book, which is Victoria's Secret Truth, is a 2-year case study that I performed on a family that has had multi-generational contact with entities that they don't quite understand. If you believe the descriptions of the hundreds or thousands of people before Victoria Fitzpatrick, who's the principal character, it's very consistent with their stories. She describes contact with greys, those 3 to 4 foot tall people, spindly, very slit-like mouths, no ears to speak of, little holes for a nose, bulbous heads, large eyes. She also describes being in touch with insectoids. That's not the first person to say that. She has
what would that look like?
Insects that
like a mantis. Think of a giant praying mantis.
Okay.
With somewhat more functional hands, and she describes actually being on a table where she's accompanied by a handful of the alien greys, and at the foot of the table is a person in a what she described as a white robe. It could be more like a doctor's medical, surgical gown. And she is having a procedure that she describes as somebody removing her eggs. And she describes an instrument in this person's hand, this entity's hand.
Yeah.
And it's very consistent. When she has done 4 hypnotic regressions with 3 world-class hypnotherapists. And those recorded sessions consistently show that the entities or creatures that she has come in contact with are described consistently throughout each of those 4 hypnotic regressions. And so they're not only consistent between themselves, among themselves, but they're consistent with other stories that have been documented by some of these world-class hypnotherapists that also put her into therapy.
So has she been abducted more than once?
According to the evidence, she's been abducted since she was a child. Her first
They keep coming back?
They keep coming back at the strangest times. In fact, most of the abductees only have a murky recollection of it. They don't really have a conscious memory. They might go, I should have been to Grandma's an hour ago. I don't know why. And in one of these cases, in fact, actually twice, she was heading from Denver, where she was living, and she was heading up to Boulder, where her boyfriend was. She was a college student. And in the early part of our relationship, when I was trying to develop this story, because I knew something was going on, she said, I never made it. Because I said, well, tell me, I'm trying to delve in, because she doesn't have conscious recall of everything.
She only gets it when she's under hypnosis. That's the only time she remembers it?
For the most part, 99% of what she knows now was retrieved under hypnosis.
Okay.
So she's trying to, she's very naive about what has happened to her. So I said, well, just tell me the story. She said, I was going to see her boyfriend. She tells me his name. And then I said, well, when did you get home? She goes, maybe 3 hours late. And I said, well, you were going to stay there? She said, well, I never made it. And I talked to him about it, and I couldn't explain why I never made it to his home. But she tells me this happened twice. Well, now we're a year into researching her story. And from what I had already looked at, I said, we're getting you regressed another time. And so we made an arrangement with Yvonne Smith to regress Victoria again. And when she regressed her, it was discovered that on both occasions, the car was stopped by a UFO. She was beamed up into a craft. She had a medical procedure performed on her, consistently again by what she thinks was the same entities in a very similar room. So what was a murky subconscious memory to her and a failure to get to her husband's home was actually an implanted memory by the entities or herself to cover the episode, and it was recalled under hypnosis. Both of those occasions were actually abductions.
When she tells the story, is she scared? during it, or is it oh, it's these guys again? All right, very calming, or how's her recollection of it?
Victoria is one of the few abductees that I've had a chance to talk to at length that says they've explained to me that they need to do it, that it's for our benefit, and they're very happy that I'm cooperative. So she is okay with
Whether
it.
she is or not,
Whether
she's
is or not.
cooperating.
Whether she is or not, and as I've studied that aspect of this phenomena in depth, it turns out that the psychologists claim that the abductees, contactees do that because they're so terrified with the experience that they try to accept it on some level so that they can live with that idea, knowing that they may be abducted anytime soon against their will, or it's an imparted memory. They call it a screen memory that's been placed there by the abductors so that the person can cope with it. That's what psychologists say.
Let me ask you this. I'm just curious. If in any of your studies, have they gone back even for, you always read up here about biblical times when they were, whether it was the apostles, whoever was walking in the desert, they came upon different things. If these so-called living beings, or if these people been there long before us, would be natural to think, well, they, our biblical times they ever met. I mean, they've met, or there's been a connection with other life forms or higher consciousness.
You do see pictures of them in hieroglyphics. People will ask about the pyramids or any of these other unexplained phenomena.
For bailing me out of that.
Yeah, that's okay.
I didn't know where I was going.
No, it's a good question.
I was trying to.
It's a good question.
Like, where's the evidence?
Right,
because
you see the pyramids and stuff.
Yeah, some will say that in the Bible they're referring to God, or in Egyptian times they're referring to their gods, but some will say these are really people from other planets or things from other planets. So where do you shake out on that? I guess. Is that what you're asking?
And where's your evidence? Or go ahead.
No,
clarify.
that's what I asked you. I mean, they show back back then. There had to be some type of during the biblical times. Yeah, you read these things. Well, that makes sense because there's probably a connection with alien form. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, there's actually a show called Ancient Aliens that tries to make that connection.
I see that on TV.
Do you believe any of those?
Well, there's some things that if the artifact that they've brought forth is authentic, then it's not a case of believing, it's a fact. For example, there's a carving in one of the ancient tombs that's a couple thousand years old in Egypt. That's I think their chief of antiquities has said, well, to the best of our knowledge, this, we're inside a pyramid that was sealed up 2,000 years ago, and they've examined it, and it's not a modern carving, and it shows a classic UFO. It shows an object that looks like a helicopter, one that looks like a submarine, and you've got to wonder, who had that imagination 2,000 years ago?
Exactly.
So there are some things that if that artifact is authentic, then it is what it is. It's a fact. But if you look at, they talk about the wheel of Ezekiel, and people say, hey, they describe possibly UFOs in terms of everyday objects that they understood. Obviously, 2,000 years ago, they're not going to describe a UFO as being a silvery metallic disc in the sky. They're going to call it a wheel that was bright and was spinning. And so that description that you find in the Bible may have been somebody just trying to use the terminology of the day to describe a UFO. In fact, somebody a few weeks ago told me he tried to explain Fatima as being a UFO incident. And if you look at the description of Fatima, it could be explained, to somebody who's non-believer. And I told that individual, when my 92-year-old mother finds out that Fatima was a UFO, she's going to say, you know how much money I wasted on Catholic schools?
Or you're going to hell, you better shut up. One of the two.
I mean, you would have to think. I mean, and of course, if then we believe, if we believe as Catholic, we believe as Christians that God put created the universe, created all. But when he created that, and he brought them, and he allowed them to come to Earth, or brought them to Earth to have some type of connection for future purposes, future generations. Like now, we don't comprehend this. It's way beyond our comprehension. And then of course you got the skeptics and the bunkers, and they try to say, well, these people are crazy, and but it always amazed me. Like I always just said, how could anybody be so closed-minded? I mean, even if you don't believe it, you can say, well, like you said, prove to me. I'm open to it. Just show me. But yet you got these people, and I'm sure you more than anybody has run into them, saying, "You're crazy. You're crazy as cat shit. I can't believe this."
Very few people say I'm crazy. I think I've established.
Well, that's a good thing then. That's a
well,
good thing.
I think the reason, Ray, the reason that is because I have a little bit of credibility.
Yeah.
I spent almost 40 years as a scientist at Wright-Patterson, an engineer, and I left there as a senior engineer.
Oh, you okay?
And I don't think that the government generally hires crazy people and lets them work on really good projects for 40 years. So I just think that also I'm not trying to convince anybody one way or another. I'm not trying to change their beliefs. I'm just telling my story, my quest, what I'm discovering. And if they want to read it, fine. If they don't, switch the channel or buy somebody else's book. So I'm not on a crusade. I'm not, the government is not doing this or doing that. No, because I think if you just read what's out there, you don't need the government to convince you of everything.
Right.
Just do your own homework, make up your own mind, and I think you'll see that it would be a great waste of space if we were the only planet that was occupied.
You ain't lying.
Do you ever? This is going to be a weird question. Do you ever fear for your safety? Because what if you stumbled onto something that somebody doesn't want people to know?
I only fear for my safety when I'm, driving in England somewhere on the wrong side of the road.
Yes.
So the answer is no
Yes.
on that one. It never crossed your mind that, because there are stories about people that just disappear because they know a little bit too much.
Well, I have made it known on every opportunity that I've signed 2 secrecy oaths, first week of work and the last day of work, and it's put my signature on it that said, if I got any secrets in my brain during the 40 years I worked there, that unless I had to reveal them in an official capacity, Senate hearing or something like that, that would be the only time I would do it if I was allowed to.
About your work.
Yeah, about to tell the story. And I've let everybody know that there is no way on this God's green earth that I'm ever going to break that security oath. And one of the biggest motivators is that I have a great pension that I earned over 40 years, and there's no way I'm going to put that in jeopardy. So, yeah, that's a little self-serving, but that's the way it is.
Of course.
You're going to have to live with that. No, there's just no way I would do that. So,
does anyone have a theory if these beings exist and they're so far advanced with us and they have metals that we can't even really comprehend? Does anyone have a theory why these things crash?
Yeah, there's some really good reasons.
Are they just crappy pilots out there? Like every group of people, there's one or
Then
two
we
that
got bad drivers
shouldn't be
here, right?
right. That's what I'm saying. What's the theory on that?
Well,
I mean, you seem to know a lot about Roswell, so why don't we just start with that?
Sure. But we'll insert this really quick story. A couple decades ago, over Gate C-17 at O'Hara in Chicago.
C-17?
Gate C-17.
At O'Hare Airport?
Yes.
I just flew from O'Hare, and I was at Gate C-21.
Oh, you're so close.
I was just right there.
I walked by it on the way to
C-21.
baggage.
But I was in that area because it's the area where the smaller planes go out of. So it was 17, 18, 19, 20, 21.
So what happened there?
I wish I could remember the date, but they had weather, they had overcast, and a few hundred feet off the ground, maybe it was several hundred feet, but clear as day, it was a United Gate, and the pilots who were taxiing around the planes started calling the tower and said, "We have an object in our airspace." And it was being phoned in by pilots in cockpits. It was being phoned in by people who were in the customer area.
They're telling the tower this?
The tower, the FAA, the phones are ringing off the hook, and they're saying, "We got an object in our airspace, and we're seeing this." And it turns out that eventually when it took off, it shot through the clouds that were there, and it left a clear hole to blue sky.
In the cloud.
Well, there's some fabulous science at work, or some ionization, whatever it was. And the guy on the ground eventually said, who saw it, he said it shot a hole in the clouds, and for a few moments they could see blue sky through it. And when United had to respond to it, United said, you know why we don't learn more about them? They traveled the entire galaxy, and their gate was taken when they got here.
By one of our jets, right?
Yeah, and that's why we can't learn more about them. They just took off.
Uh-huh.
So going back to the metal thing, I do believe that metals were recovered. We certainly know from Jesse and Marcel that they filled up what they called carryalls. There was some kind of a mini truck that the Air Force, Army Air Corps owned at that time. They filled them up. They drove them to Roswell Army Airfield, loaded them up on a B-29. They went to Fort Worth, where the 8th Army Air Corps was. Some of it went to the gentleman who was Chief of Staff of the Air Force in Washington. Most went to Wright-Patterson.
And we know this for a fact? Or is that just what people say?
Here are the only fact that we know for sure about Roswell. There is only one, I call it irrefutable, immutable fact. Whatever it was that the Air Force picked up and drove back to Roswell from the Corona area, whatever it was taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And how do we know that? The man who handled it and was responsible for getting it to Fort Worth said so. That was Jesse Marcel. He said it many times over, signed an affidavit. But General Thomas Dubose, who is Chief of Staff of the 8th Army Air Corps, which was the site that Marcel brought the material, in later years signed a legal document. He signed an affidavit and said, what came from Roswell with Marcel that was picked up in the desert was brought here. Some of it went to Washington, and that was eventually flown to Wright-Pat, but another airplane went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Immutable, irrefutable. Whatever that stuff was went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It can't be denied.
So do we know why it crashed?
That's a good theory. You know, if you think about it, that area, if you drew a dartboard out, Roswell was the bullseye. You had Los Alamos, where they were designing and developing. You had Trinity, where they were blowing up the stuff. Roswell was the home of the 509th bombing group. They're the ones who did Nagasaki and Hiroshima. They were the only nuclear-armed bombing group in the world. They had nuclear weapons at Roswell. Now, you're this advanced culture, and you're coming to Earth, and you want to know all about tribal warfare on planet Earth. The bullseye was Roswell. They had nukes there. Everybody else was either blowing them up or they were making them. But it was also high-powered radar in the area. You had White Sands Missile Range. Right. They were testing V-2 rockets in the 40s, blowing them up and all kinds of things. High-powered radar there to track these rockets. They also had high-powered radar to protect the nuclear sites like the Army Airfield and Los Alamos. Think about it. These might not have had the best defenses in the world. They're probes coming from another planet. The mothership is off there, probably with all the defenses. And these are the sport models coming out, and they're just, testing. They're pulsing. They're checking the deer. They're looking at the elk in the desert. They're traveling, I don't know, we had spacecraft going 17,000 miles an hour up in space. Let's just say they're doing 17,000 miles an hour over the desert. And they come into the path of maybe not one, but two of these high-powered radars. The guidance system goes out for a microsecond, a nanosecond. You know how many miles you're going to travel at 17,000 miles an hour? A bunch. Their guidance anti-collision goes out for a microsecond, and they've traveled 10 feet, 100 feet. I don't know what the spacing was of the spacecraft. Boom, they hit. One goes down in Corona, the other one stays afloat, goes across the northern end of the White Sands Missile Range, and crashes on the plains of San Agustin outside Daddle, New Mexico. So that answers 2 of your questions.
So that 2 crashes the same day?
2 crashes probably within seconds of each other, minutes of each other.
Because we only hear about Roswell. That's all we ever hear about.
And that's why you have me here. So I say, I'm thinking, okay, did they shoot it down? No, because they're not stupid enough and they didn't have the technology. Oh, yeah, sure, they could have had a missile launch at that time on that day. Some people think they had these terrible thunderstorms. If you've ever been in New Mexico in a thunderstorm, that lightning is scary stuff. You'll be like, where's my bunker? So there's any number of reasons they could have gone down. But the theory is, for those of us who've researched it, is they probably hit the radar, boom, it
Flickered for a sec?
Yeah, it put their nav out for a second, and they hit each other. And they're of like substance. So what? They're indestructible if they hit Earth or something, but between them, they're not. So they bounce, they lose control. One crashes outside Corona, and the other one crashes on the plains of San Agustin. And there you have it. It's a simple thing of they just ran through the radar.
I guess.
Yeah.
How about the one in England? Didn't it land?
Yeah, we were talking about the Rendlesham Forest incident.
Right, because it seems like they just hover a lot, and we see them a lot. But sometimes they do actually come down, according to legends and records and things like that.
In the Rendlesham Forest incident, it happened there. That's on the southeast coast, about a 2-hour drive outside of London. And at that time in 1980, there was nuclear bombs stored there. The top rank of the Air Force won't admit it because they have oaths that they swore they would not admit that we had nukes there at the time. But the man who was in charge of the nuclear facility there, he was in charge of that, and he would know. He went on record saying we had nukes. In 1980, a 10-foot glass triangular-shaped UFO landed, and the people who were the security police, they actually touched it. And they wrote it, and they photographed it, and for the next 3 days, this UFO flew all over Rendlesham Forest, which was outside Woodbridge Royal Air Station, where the U.S. had a 10 station with nuclear bombs.
The glass thing.
The glass thing landed.
Came down, went up, came down, went up.
Went up, and then for the next 3 days, it flew everywhere. And Colonel Charles Halt, who I had a chance to talk to many years later, he had dozens of security police out there chasing the UFOs. It shot beams of light down at their feet, and it actually burned a hole in the weapons storage area that was full of nuclear bombs. And they took Geiger counters out there afterwards, and it pegged the meter. It was dozens, 20, 30 times what the background radiation was. And they actually tested it.
Ray, have any of these people who've been abducted or had connection with these alien beings have heard them talk? Do they how they communicate? Just telepathically?
Telepathically has been like 99%.
So they never heard them talk. They have no voice or anything like that. There's been no
At least when communicating to us.
It's always telepathically between themselves and between the abductee and the entities. It's all telepathic.
It seems like the aliens that we picture or that have been described are very similar, yet it seems like the spacecrafts are very different. Are they all from different places, or are they all from the same place, or does anyone have an idea about that or a theory about that? You see what I'm asking?
Right. There are documents out there. There's research out there that is taken from people who have been abductees, and the description of the abductors is 20 or 30 different looking species.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the Nordics and the reptilians and other insectoids and the grays and the tall grays and the short grays and the blue grays. So there's differences in just physical description. There's differences in their craft, the interiors. There's differences in the clothes they wear. Some don't wear any type of clothing. So
some do.
Some do. Some of they're tight-fitting, silvery outfits with a small emblem that they didn't recognize. There's that description. There's some that say, "Oh, these people have had what I will describe as a white Jesuit robe," and that's not only one person that's saying this. Victoria has said this.
That's what she described.
In one case, she said there was like a council. I was brought before a council. and there was 3 of them, and they all had these Jesuit type robes, the hoods on them, and she describes them in daring detail, right down to one of them crossing his leg and having his knee higher than the other. They have great recall under therapy, under hypnosis.
Have you, when you're investigating these, have you ever found one that you don't believe? Or have you believed, it seems like you've believed every single one.
Well, the interesting thing is that...
or do you think they all have a little bit of something to believe?
I have had people that have tried to get something past me, but they usually send it to me kind of tongue-in-cheek, like, what do you think about this one? And I'll discover something, I'll look at a photo and do a little bit of research. Most are easy to debunk. Like I know somebody that had a camera, and when I researched it, I discovered that the lens had a well-known defect that allows it to disperse light in like a purple-looking thing. So they were giving me all of these, it was the craft behind me with the purple rays. And I went, no, you had an Apple XYZ phone that has a bad lens in it, and it's a no, and you can take pictures with it. But most of the people who have sent me things, I've spent considerable time trying to...
They're asking your opinion? Like they're asking your advice?
And it turns out famous people, a lady who not only wrote her own book about her experiences, but she is in John Mack's book called Abduction. And now John Mack is one of the most famous people. He was a Harvard faculty member. And so I'm at a conference giving a talk a few weeks ago, and a woman comes up to me and she said, hauntingly, I just heard your talk. You're the only person that can help me. Never met her before. Very petite lady, very well dressed. And I said, how's that? She goes, you have a military background. You're honestly reporting this stuff. I need your help. So I have a dialogue with her via email. Turns out that she wrote a book. I won't say what the name of that book is right now. She wrote her own book about all of her circumstances. She's a longtime abductee. She has led groups that help abductees. And so I read it, and she wanted me to contact the military. And because she thought, well, maybe they would tell me why they had a decades-long interest in her. She said, well, they might tell you because they won't tell anybody else. I've tried for 30 years, and she gave me some leads. So I thought, well, this is really dangerous, but I read her book, and I did some little fact-checking, and I discovered that some of the stuff checked out. Well, then a few weeks later, I pick up the John Mack book, and I'm reading a chapter about a woman. And I suddenly realized it's that woman.
Mm-hmm.
And she had told me that she had a history with John Mack, but she wouldn't tell me that she was in the book. She never revealed that. I'm reading that, and I go, that's her story. So now I have an independent verification because I know that John Mack had already regressed her, and her story is in his book. So now I'm going, maybe I might be able to help her. But
how would you help?
I would contact the person that I know had investigated her, whom I found, and I haven't contacted yet. I'm just going to give them a call and go, hey, here's my name. I'm contacting you on behalf of my research, and I'm contacting you on behalf of this, and I know that you and this person officially met while you were cross-examining her. I'm wondering if you'll talk about it.
What does she want for help?
She has been under psychiatric help for the longest time.
Yeah.
And I just think the question she wants answered is, what do they know about her that she doesn't know that kept their interest in her for 20-some years? Why was she constantly under surveillance? What were they looking for?
The government or who?
Yeah, the government, and more than one agency. And she'd like to know what it is. And I'm thinking, well, that might be interesting to know. I don't really have the time to devote to it now, but it's something I might follow up on. But that's, when I get independent corroboration, that tells me there's something really, really going on here. Can I help her? Probably not. I'm not optimistic that this person is going to help me.
Right. This sounds a little silly, but I'm going to ask it. Any of these abductees, people say, have anyone felt they felt any romantic feelings for these abductors, or there was
that one lady fell for a jar of water in that one movie? So it's possible, right?
But I mean, there was romantic or sexual
connection, some sort of connection.
That's a perfect segue question, because in John Mack's book, he tells a story. There's about 20 chapters in there, and I think there's about 19 individuals whose cases he was given permission to reveal, and he does in detail. And in one of the early chapters is a story about a young man who was abducted as a teenager, and he had intercourse with a very attractive alien entity. It was his. It was, a dream come true for him.
So when he had an outer world experience, he was
yeah,
saying literally. It was literally an outer world experience. John, you can write that down.
Yeah, there you go. It's just like watching Cocoon again.
He literally, literally had the experience, but it turns out that was on the first occasion, because then after that, they were just looking for semen. It was artificially taken. She was in a room. He would get excited, and they would strap a machine to him. So it was only a physical thing the first time with her, but every time they brought him on the ship, she would appear. He was thinking, boom, this is great. But
this is great.
And he fell for it again.
We'll get freaky diggy. Freaky diggy.
And it never happened? According to him.
They took it artificially, because they use it for their breeding program. It's funny, but I wouldn't believe it unless John Mack wrote it, and John Mack put it in the book, and it's there for everybody to see. So, there is those sexual relations, and that's not the only time.
I mean, you hear about people who've said they felt they had a relation or a sexual encounter, and they were impregnated. Women said they felt they were impregnated, and I don't know whatever happened to the child, whatever, but they felt they were impregnated or clarified that they were inseminated somehow. I mean, I've read articles, I've read stuff like that, and it always intrigued me. But we never hear the after. What happened? They had the baby. What happened?
In some cases, the person, especially the female, is taken on board a ship and is presented with a child, and they're basically tell her, this is the result of you being part of this breeding program. And in some cases,
I don't understand myself. I'm not sure I understand.
Smart.
I apologize.
And in some cases, there's the feeling that the person who's been presented with the baby, there's a feeling that they're presented with the child because the child needs some nurturing. They're trying to make this hybrid child more human-like than hybrid. Wow. And it needs that nurturing. They understand the fact that we nurture, and that makes us human. Because what happens is the hybrids lack the ability to actually have emotions. They're very uncaring, very unemotional. Right. In many cases, both parties, whoever the male parent was and the female, will be brought on board, and they'll both be presented. In Victoria's case, she knows now that she's been part of the breeding program. She knows that she has been presented with children. So she says, I'm not sure that they're mine, but I'm making that assumption based upon the interactions and the type of interactions I had.
She says her eggs were taken, right?
That's correct.
Has any doctor been able to look into her and go, yeah, well, something happened here, and these eggs are gone? Anything like that?
Her gynecologist is aware that she has had symptoms of pregnancy without being pregnant. And in that case, and I am only extrapolating from the clinical evidence and her interviews, and melding those two together, in the regressions, she says, they're putting something inside of me. She's not saying they're removing my eggs. Now, she does say that in other parts of the regression, but she's saying they're putting something inside of me. And now I take that statement and I marry it with information she gave me in over 60 hours of interviews, when she says, I've had a swollen ovaries. I've had swelling in my side that was indicative of me being pregnant. And there are stories from other people who've been in this situation, and this is what has happened. They have taken an embryo at some stage, and they have reimplanted it into a human female. And they let it gestate for 30 days or 60 days, and they let this embryo grow in a female host. And then 30 days or 60 days later, they remove this. So it's at a point where the woman gets suspicious that she's pregnant and may not yet go to her gynecologist to get it validated. And then she discovers that the symptoms disappear. Well, that's a mystery. And the gynecologist goes, well, what's that all about? I don't understand it. But it fits the pattern in the story of other people saying, I know they implanted this embryo, and I know it was in me for a couple of months. In Victoria's case, she only has had the symptoms, but has never had it validated, though her gynecologist has said, I don't quite understand what's going on with you in a couple of these cases. And Victoria, not know what's going on, didn't have the gynecologist inspect for that. So I don't know if we can go back to the records. You know, her gynecologist has long since retired, but that's what I think has happened to her. It's very consistent with what other people have reported.
When's the latest sighting that you know about? Seems like they're all like in the 80s or this one time in the 1500s. You know what I'm saying? Has there been one in the last month that you know about, or the last 6 months?
I would suggest everybody go to the National UFO Reporting Center. That's NU.
Is that a place or a website?
It's a website.
Okay.
It's NUFORC, National UFO Reporting Center. It's run by Peter Davenport. And every civilian in the world, every military person who wants to, can file a report of what they see. There are maybe 15,000 reports that go all the way back to the 50s. They're segregated by state, by date, by type, and anyone can go in there, look at the database. They probably get 2,000 reports a year, so if you do the math,
Really?
you know, there are several put in there every day.
Are there any that pique your interest that you're going to explore?
I have so much on my plate right now that I can't get to it. But I tell everybody this. As a researcher, it's very important for everybody and anybody to take 10 minutes out and file a report. It's a very simple form. And I tell them to do that because if I'm researching an event, I'm going to go to that database to look to see what was happening in that area in the days, weeks, and months surrounding that event. Because I often find corroboration. I had a sighting in December of 2011 in my neighborhood.
Really?
Yeah, and it's in the book. It's in
By
book,
you?
By you. It's in book one.
No, I mean, did you sight it or see it?
It was a 90-foot craft that was 75 feet
Oh,
in
you did say it. It was okay.
It was 75 feet in the air, 200 feet in front of me, and we had one of these crazy, you know, low cloud days where it's barely over a 2-story building, and it was covering the treetops. And I was coming home from an appointment after my car wreck, and I saw this thing kind of change the waffle of light over my moonroof. And I went, that's a quiet airplane, because the airbase is right there. The airbase is 2 miles behind me. And I went, that's awfully quiet for one of those C5s or whatever. And I look down, and I see the back end of a craft, which I eventually, you know, measured the building, and I went, it was 90 foot by, you know, maybe 30 foot high. And I drew the back end of it, and it went right into the cloud bank. I saw it for about 7 seconds, as quiet as dropping a Q-tip on a carpet. And so I wrote the story up, and so I had my own sighting, yeah.
Anybody else?
I was just, was that the first and last, or have you had others too?
Well, that was the first sighting that I knew was a craft. But what I did is I went into the National UFO Reporting Center database months afterwards, and I didn't put my own sighting in there for a couple of years. And the reason is I didn't want to contaminate the database. You know, you get a copycat. Yeah, I saw the one over Wright-Pat. So what happened is now a couple of years after the fact, I go into the database, yet not reporting mine, and there were 5 similar sightings in the Dayton area within that same week.
Anybody at the base that you knew or anything like that?
No, and I really didn't go back and try to find those people. Several were anonymous, or they just put initials in the database. But the fact that there were 5 sightings of triangular craft or black craft or with large red lights on it that were corroborative of my sighting made that database extremely useful to me as not only a participant, but as somebody who is a researcher. And that's why I tell everybody, it's only one dot in that impressionist painting, but we put enough dots there, and this picture is going to develop.
Right.
And that's why I tell everybody to do it.
Do you ever think, well, man, they're on to me. They're on to me.
Right.
They're after me.
All right.
They're after me, man.
Okay.
They're after me.
They know I'm doing
We're
this
gonna
work.
get you. I don't know. I mean,
Because what are the chances? A guy that checks out UFO sightings has UFO sightings.
right.
Right?
But here's the thing, too.
true.
Is any of them, I mean, not in any of the talks you said today, were any of them meaning violent, where they were, people were violently attacked or anything like that? It wasn't like that. It's just people to make a connection for whatever reason. Am I wrong?
That is very, very, very correct. There's no blatant attacks. But if you think about it, I don't think they want their presence known. Just look at it from,
All right.
we can look at it from a couple standpoints. The first standpoint is they have this breeding program. There is no question about it. Whoever these entities are, wherever they come from, there are thousands and thousands of witnesses and evidence that proves that to be true. Now, if you're an alien entity and you're doing that to the populace, do you want to be known? I don't think so.
Right.
Because you know what would happen? I think they know enough about us. The human race would come together as never before. And we would like John Wayne on them.
Yeah.
You know, listen here, Pilgrim, this is not happening, in my backyard. And we would overtly fight them. Now, that's not to say we're not covertly fighting them, but we would band together as and wow, imagine what would happen then. So I think that's why they're always at night. They're not landing on the White House lawn at noon. It's always 4 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock, midnight. No, it's dark. They don't want
Secluded areas too.
secluded
right?
areas.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to be known here. So they're not going to go around zapping people. I bet they could, but they don't want to do that. So it's a covert operation.
That's interesting. And by all accounts, if some of those beings, extraterrestrials, have had sexual contact with women, there could be they could be their offspring that are walking the earth now. That could be here.
Oh, now we go, right?
If you read the book, They Walk Among Us by Dr. David Jacobs. He's professor emeritus from Temple University. He's a history professor. He is also a hypnotic therapist licensed, and he's regressed thousands of these people. In his book, Walking Among Us, my first book is Nuts and Bolts, Silvery Lights in the Sky. That's stage 1. Stage 2 is Victoria's Secret Truth. That's, okay, she's part of this breeding program. Dr. Jacobs' book, Walking Among Us, is the final stage. In there, he documents human beings or hybrids who say, look, I've been part of the breeding program, or I'm a hybrid, and I have a mission given to me by the aliens that they send down hybrids that can pass for humans, and my job is to train them, to show them how to use a knife, fork, and spoon, to tell them what a television set is, to show them what it is to be a human being. And I'm being forced by the aliens that had me as part of this program. I now have to help these hybrids integrate into our society. And that's where the title of the book comes from, Walking Among Us. And Dr. Jacobs, who I've chatted to at length, is not a crazy guy.
Yeah, are you buying this?
Yes.
Would it surprise you?
It very much surprises me, but you got to look at the source. Now, I will admit, I have not done any homework on this, okay? But I'm going out on a limb with the answer that if I had to give you a yes or no, or fight 10 rounds with Ray Boom Boom Mancini, I'm going to give you an answer, and my answer is I would believe it because I believe the source, and I believe his documentation and his pedigree and all of that stuff. I would say I have no reason to doubt him.
And why would he put it out there and risk everything? Is what you're thinking, right?
That's not the reason I believe him. I have to consider the source.
Well, two questions. One is,
Sure.
And personal. I mean, have you had any contact with any of these type of beings?
Hybrids?
Hybrids?
I would say that unknowingly, and if I look back at people that I have talked to, that I now suspect that some of them are hybrids, or could be. Victoria could very well be a 3rd or 4th generation contactee. She could be a hybrid. So it would be, no one has, let me just pause there. The answer is, I now think that I have.
Yeah.
to talk to people.
Now, people who watch this, because man, this is some
I know.
sci-fi site,
I know.
man. This is some.
Or they might be saying, "Hey, you had me until the
don't-
hybrid thing."
No, yeah.
You know what I mean? I was kind of believing, and now this guy thinks
But that's what I'm saying.
my next door neighbor's an alien.
Hey man, this is some deep shite, man. Deep shite. I'm there. But I'm truly intrigued. So that's one question I wanted to ask you, if you thought you had some kind of contact with them. And I forgot to see. Maybe I wasn't supposed to ask the second question
Well,
I
I'll
just
ask
said
you a
for a
question.
moment. I'll think
Okay,
of it
you'll
again.
think of it. Okay.
I'll think
But
of
we
it.
know what it's
Somebody
about.
wanted to know what Hangar 18 is. Do you know what Hangar 18 is?
Yes.
What is it?
Yeah. Okay. Hangar 18 to maybe the newbie UFO enthusiast is a place where when they brought the materials from Roswell, they flew them in. It's an obvious scenario. We fly in a little B-29. We have dozens of hangars that.
Is it the Air Force Base?
Yeah, at the Air Force Base. We have dozens of hangars that 3 B-29s connected to each other, wing to wing, could have flown in. They're huge hangars. So what they would do is, to keep everything stealthy, they fly it into a hangar, they close the doors, the military guys trot it out, and they go, hey, these are the casings that hold the aliens, and here's the casings that hold those thousands of little 3-inch square pieces of metal. Most of the hangars had basements too, for whatever purpose. And they said, well, let's put it down there in the vault in the basement. Okay, and they trot it down there. So Hangar 18 became this, whatever it was, an image that people could hang a story on. Okay, Wright-Patterson, where do we put him? Hangar 18. Got it. So when I tell the Wright-Pat story, if I say Hangar 18, everyone's going to remember it. It's a point of reference.
Do we know where it's located?
Is there a Hangar 18?
Good questions. I'll get to it.
Go.
There is no Hangar 18. In other words, let's say I have 20 hangars. None actually had a single number Hangar 18 on it. We have Hangar 5 and 14 and 27, and they could be in anywhere on the 8,000 acres. So what I suspect happened is eventually somebody wanted to write a story about Wright-Patterson, and they said, it's an invention. It's just a concept which people could latch onto. So they said, Hangar 18, that's where they took the aliens. Now, I went on a search, and I said, let me start with Building 18. So I got the 1947 maps out, and I found several Building 18s. In fact, there's a cluster that has 18A, B, C, D, E, and F. And in the middle of this cluster, none of those buildings look like a hangar, none. But in the middle of this cluster is a Building 23. Wait a minute, maybe it was Hangar 18. And then I checked it out, and I checked out everywhere I could. You couldn't get a B-29 in there to save your life. So it didn't fit the scenario, it was in the wrong area. Now, do I believe that there could have been a Hangar 18? Did it ever exist? And I think the answer is yes. But I think it was a case of mistaken identity. So first of all, the real Hangar 18 was just something that a writer made up. Okay? But after I did my investigation and I said, what's the criteria for a real Hangar 18? Did it fit a B-29 in it? Was it close to the actual airstrip that they would have flown in on that day? Because there's 2 separate areas to Wright-Patterson, and Area A now and B. They both have runways. Both could have accommodated a B-29. But Area B, where I did my research, would have been where they would have flown in the plane, because that's where all the research was being done. That was the tech area. The other area is where, the operational planes did. So all the science was in the other area. So I looked at all the candidates, and I looked at things like, who worked there at the time? What kind of research was being done there? Who worked there later? Was there any famous person that ever visited there? Because if you find somebody who's famous, like Goldwater wanted to get into FTD, and he eventually visited, you know something's going on. So if you know what to look for, and you know there's enough clues. So I finally found 6 places that I thought would be Hangar 18. And then I went through the science, and I went through all the archives, and I narrowed it down to one building that I think, if there was a Hangar 18, this would have been Hangar 18. And I'll tell you how I got to that conclusion. I had a map out one day, and in the back of my head, there was a story of the Etosha. And
What's that?
the story of the Atosha is when Mel Fisher was trying to find the famous Spanish galleon, the Atosha, with all of its treasure.
Okay.
He had spent 13, 15 years looking for it. He couldn't find it.
Okay.
One day he's out in the umpteenth year, and he had found smatterings of stuff, and he had it assessed, and he realized it was from the Atosha. So after all those years, he knew he was close, but he couldn't find the mother lode. And the cabin window was open in the boat that he was on, and a wind came in, and he had the map laid out of the find field, and he was like plotting everything as the years went along. He couldn't figure it out, and this cup of coffee blew down onto the map, and it laid out this pattern in this direction. And it came to him. The Atosha didn't sink in place. It broke up over several miles. And the find field should have been a clue, but they found so few artifacts that they thought that it just went deeper into the sand and it was going to be within, let's say, a 100-yard area. It turns out the Atosha treasure was spread out over miles. And it wasn't until the coffee blew down on his map and this random yet very accurate pattern blew out that he figured, I know where the Atosha treasure could have gone. Within a couple of days, he uncovers the treasure. The exact same thing happened to me when I had a 1947 map. And I was going through all of the possible places that Hangar 18 could have been, and I spun the map. I don't generally drink coffee, so I couldn't spill it. I spun the map around, and then I realized that there is a complex of 4 buildings. The outer edges are 2-story office buildings. The 2 middle buildings are hangars. And what you have is, you have building 7, 8, 2, and 1.
Which adds up to?
No. When you turn the map around, there is the number 18 staring you in the face. Hangar 1 is there, and building 8 is there. So if you were to take a quick glance at a map, you might go, that's Hangar 18. But even better, if you're a pilot coming in at night, all the buildings at Wright-Pat, for the most part, have a building number on it. So when they're coming in from the flight line, what they would have read is, they would have, if they had long-range vision, on the leftmost building, they would have seen the number 7. Second from leftmost would have been building 2, and the building in front of them, in which they were bringing their craft, at about the height the numbers would have been on the building, they would have seen number 1 next to number 8. And that, my friends, could have been how Hangar 18 got started. It was just
Kismet.
by accident, and someone goes, well, where did you bring
18.
I brought the plane into Hangar 18.
In all fairness, 7, 8, 2, and 1 do add up to 18.
That's right. But
Thank you.
But they never, oh my God.
I'm just trying to help you here, Ray.
Yeah, 15, 17.
I'm an
18.
engineer and I never added them up.
God. I had to write a book.
Pound it.
Seriously, I had to write a
There you
book.
go, man. I thought that's why you knew when he was going with that. He goes,
No,
man,
that's a double. That's a double.
Double
right there.
whammy.
And
Put
now-
that in your next book and smoke it.
And now, where would you hide a book?
Where would I hide a book?
A library, right?
Yeah.
And you'd hide a tree in the forest. You know the back end of that building, that hangar? The back end of that building is several thousand feet of storage space for the Air Force Museum. Everything in there is aviation related, and it's been there for years. Now, not in 1947, that part wasn't finished. If I had a spacecraft and I wanted to hide a small 30-foot craft, I'd hide it in there and nobody would know it.
Because they would think it was just part of the exhibit.
It was just part of the exhibit. So it has such a long, rich history. The numbers match up. You've now given me yet another thing. I never even thought of
Just
it.
trying to help Ray.
But
you're going to get a quote in the next book.
I know I should. I
You-
should
you
get
are
some
gonna
sort
get
of
a quote in the
MLA
next-
form,
you-
and it should be at the bottom.
we're going to get some pictures in the next book. This is just so awesome. Yeah, we're going to do it.
I can't tell you how fascinated I am, and anybody's watched and you can listen, and these stories are fascinating. To think that, again, that we are the only living beings with all the evidence and with all the evidence. That's what it is. And that the repeated stories, the people that have been interviewed, how they've all matched up. I mean, you just got to be naive, man, or stupid. It's just to think we're the only living beings and these other things don't exist. But these people who could be out there, always looking to, debunk everything and what do they call them, debunkers or
Yeah,
Debunkers.
there you go.
debunkers.
Debunkers.
And but I think it's just, I think as we go down more and more, we hear more and more stories. It's proven, and obviously, I think eventually it's going to all come out at one time, and eventually, and I think we're gonna have this connection, and maybe there is a significant happening when the intelligence of these beings of this from other sources come in and we use it for the betterment of man to prolong the humanity or something, because I mean we're I mean all these things now with that the water sources and the air and everything and all we're using up our natural materials. And the Earth ending event, eventually it's going to have to wear out. It's going to end. Maybe these people help us to extend this world, Earth, a little longer. I don't know.
That's a very
I don't
positive
know.
thought, and I do hope that happens.
The good Lord put them all there anyway. Put us all here anyway, and so I would think that before it all comes down, the synergy would all happen. I mean, I would like to think. People are out there going, man, he's lost his mind now.
Hey, why
man.
not?
He's
Let's
lost
be
his mind.
positive about it, right?
He's out another planet now, man. Too many hits. Got too many hits.
Too much leather.
Hey, man, let me tell you, so you get smacked around a little bit, you start thinking all kind of stuff. No, I just think, man, it's just, if you read enough books, that's what I was going to ask you. I finally realized what I was going to ask you. But if you read enough books and you read enough articles and you talk to enough people, but intelligent people in the know, like Ray, then you got to come away with saying it's got to be there's some semblance to this. There's some reasoning to this. It makes sense. Other than your own, what other maybe 2 or 3 books do you think you suggest? Other than, we're going to pump yours again before we leave.
In just a sec.
But other books out there that you think, whether it's that are probably the most knowledgeable or the best books to read about this subject matter.
The UFO subject matter is so deep, it's so wide, and there's thousands of books. And I think the first book I think everyone should read is Fire in the Sky by Travis Walton.
Fire in the Sky, I usually say it.
And I recommend
It's 400 pages, Ray. I don't feel like reading that much. Can I just watch the movie?
The movie, unfortunately, is a Hollywoodization.
Ah, shoot. All right, so go ahead.
But, if you know the movie and you talk to Travis, Travis he does a cameo in the courtroom scene. He's in the back, and Travis is like got a 5-second cameo.
That's funny.
And the reason I like the book is because it's well written, it's first person, and it has absolutely everything that you would want in a story. But it's so interesting, and the fact that a logger wrote this is only more evidence that, and Travis told me this, and he's told me a lot more in the hours I had with him, that they fixed him in many ways, and not only physically, but intellectually. And when you read his book, you go, a logger did not write this, but he did. He wrote, virtually every word. That's part of the miracle of what happened when he encountered these people, because a normal logger cannot write a book of that quality, in my opinion.
Well, see, this is kind of like me doing the show, because most people say, fighters not the smartest people, but I'm an educated pugilist.
Do you think
I'm an educated pugilist? So people go, he
Do you
must
feel
have
like
got smacked in
aliens
the-
made you smarter?
No. He got smacked around so much, but now somebody touched him because he's
Knocked
actually
something loose.
he's actually got a time. He's doing a show on the air. He's got a live stream show, and he can spell Mississippi. The whole thing.
So Travis's book is the first one.
Travis's book is the first one.
Fire in the Sky.
It's Fire in the Sky. I would think the second book that I would read from a historical perspective is one by Richard Dolan. And he actually did 2 books of a trilogy. It's been years. We're all waiting on the third one. But it's called, I think, UFOs and the National Security State. And basically, it's a compendium from 1947 through probably the early 90s of every UFO story ever. So it's a wonderful historical perspective, and it's in digestible chunks. So you can look at the whole history, and there's Travis's story will be in there, and all the other Exeter will be in there, and Rendlesham will be in there. So that's a super book. And then if you want to delve deeper into the abductee story, but a super interesting story, is Yvonne Smith's book called Coronado. And the story is she and several of the people who have come to her for therapy are at a UFO conference at the Del Coronado Hotel.
I was going to say, the Coronado is where the SEALs train.
Exactly.
Coronado Island.
They're at the Del Coronado Hotel.
Right.
And President Clinton is going to arrive there a couple days after the conference ends. He's going to give a talk. The place is flooded with Secret Service. They've been there for weeks.
Yeah.
They're checking everything out. They're vetting everything. They're doing the place for the visit. And one of the nights, several of the people are simultaneously abducted as a group from the Del Coronado Hotel right under the nose of the Secret Service. And the story that Yvonne tells is she doesn't know about it, but she eventually gets some of these people back in her sessions, and individually they start reporting about what happened to them at the Del Coronado that week. And she suddenly realizes, oh my God, it was a mass abduction, and all of these people are in my support group. So now she's onto it, and then, she starts to
unravel it,
and wrote a book about it. It's called Coronado. It's something about UFOs and whatever. But that is a really, really easy to digest book, and it's a fascinating story because it's mass abduction, and it's told by Yvonne Smith, who's one of the world's top hypnotic regressionists. So those would be three books that I think anybody could just nosh into and would really love to read.
And Mike, the Fire in the Sky, you said a 500-page book, but you take the ride, man. That's what the reading the book's about, right?
That's why you have. That's why you put it in the bathroom with you. Just do a little bit at a time. You don't need to do all 400 pages. It probably has pictures. It can't be that long. Right? Big print. I can get through that. Da Vinci Code went really quick.
They're fascinating.
All right, let's talk about these books one more time.
Okay,
the first book was in what year?
That was in 2016.
This is 50 Shades of Grays.
50 Shades of Grays.
And how do people get it?
Find it on Amazon.
Okay, and that's easy, and it's written by Ray Szymanski. And the second book is called 50 Shades of Grays, Victoria's Secret Truth, right?
It's also on Amazon.
Yeah.
And I will plug, I have a friend that owns a very small store in Fenton, Michigan. It's called The Open Book. It's on Shiawassee Avenue. And she owns a bookstore. It's the only bookstore in the country that will sell my book. And I do it as a plug for her. So if you're in Fenton and come see me on the 12th of July, I'll be doing a book signing in front of her bookstore.
And you have another book. He has another book that you're going to bring out eventually, right?
About 3 years from now, it's going to be called 50 Shades of Gray's Nothing But the Truth.
First of all, too quick. Well,
I just got hit
with a guy. After, he says, "Ray, I think you want to be abducted, Paisan."
God, could you imagine?
Hey, man.
You know what?
That'd be interesting, man. Brad, is my friend Brad Berkowitz, who's a terrific boxing writer. Brad Berkowitz. Bad Brad.
Yeah.
Would you think if they opened up this brain, what they're going to find out?
Oh, my gosh. Here's one thing I would tell the aliens. If my camera's on right now, you'll be glad you don't have ears.
Yeah.
Because you'll be listening to stories for the whole damn abduction, man.
But my other question was, the 50 Shades of Grays, did they come after and say, look, you got to change the name? It's a little confusing because of 50 Shades of Grey. Did any of the authors, or not the author, the publisher of that, say, come on, you got to change it?
They didn't, and here's why. You cannot copyright a title for a book or a movie.
No, you can only copyright the content.
You cannot.
Can't copyright a name, only the script and the content.
That's right.
Property
You cannot copyright it, and so I ran it past attorneys, and they said, "Oh yeah, that's fine."
That's right.
So
That's right.
it's good in Britain and it's good in the U.S. and no one
right.
has ever said anything. They just said, "That is really clever," but I'll tell you what happened. When I first went to look for your book, you wouldn't believe the stuff I found.
Don't Google it.
You're right. There's so many movies with the same name because you can't copyright a title.
You cannot copyright a title.
That's right.
Yeah,
Ray had a chance to stay at the hotel and play golf here.
I did.
So tell people about your experience, and then I don't even have to promote the place, do I?
Oh my God. I'm coming back. I don't know when. I'll write another book and come back, but I may just come here for vacation. This place is 5.5 stars all the way. I don't know, it may be the architecture, but it has old world charm. We ate here, we had breakfast, we had dinner. This is a fabulous place. I am so impressed.
Bring your friends. Come back, bring your friends, and write up something on TripAdvisor. They love that
We're
stuff.
going to, if I could give it 5.5 stars, I would, despite the fact that the golf course was very soggy because they've had monsoons here. I loved it. I played from the middle tees.
Seriously, it's like the rainy season.
We've got him some
in Thailand here, isn't it?
I played it. It was fabulous. And I played Pebble Beach. I've played Carnoustie. I've played fabulous golf courses, Royal Lytham and St. Anne's, Royal, Birkdale. This course would hold its own against all of those for every aspect. I couldn't be more impressed, and I thank you, and I can't wait to come back.
And
Just can't wait.
That was
world.
otherworldly. No, all right. Real fast, right? I got my friend just texted me again.
Sure.
No one was saying.
Go ahead.
He said, "Please ask your guest this question. What did he think of the '80s show, The Martian Chronicles?"
Of which show? What was it?
The Martian Chronicles. I don't remember.
I'd like to say I saw it. I did not see it.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll tell your audience to look at Louis Elizondo's show, Unidentified. It has some really good stuff. It's about the Navy's encounters that happened about 15 years ago. And that is as close to a good documentary show as you will ever see.
What channel?
Unidentified?
I think it's the History Channel.
Okay.
That's why I always got them great shows.
They do.
80, but History
You get
Channel
sucked
got-
into the
Oh,
History
I do.
Channel for a
I
couple
do.
hours.
I love that stuff.
But this is solid. This is a no BS, facts only show, and I have not found anything that I can debate.
Unidentified.
It's called The Unidentified. Yeah.
Huh. That's awesome.
Well,
Another question?
no. I was hey, Brad. I hope that's your question there. I didn't see it, but anyway, I guess look. I don't want to. It's been so. I've enjoyed. This is probably my favorite show. My favorite show, and I mean, I just love this stuff. And Mike, I can't think this is why you're here.
I know. One more quick question.
Please, yeah.
We've got camera equipment now that couldn't be better. Like we're 4K, everything. You know what I'm saying? How come we can't get better pictures of UFOs?
First of all, there's lots of really good pictures.
Are
that
there
have
some
been
good
taken.
ones that we just don't know about?
There are some good ones. A lot of people put them out. Unfortunately, they're lights in the sky. I think we're finding better ones. I know people who have some, and when they make that revelation, I think it's going to be corroborative of the things that now this show about the Navy stuff is. And many times it's just a night sighting, so it's just lights in the sky at night. I think that's part of the issue. The perpetrators, if I can call them that, don't do a lot of things in the daytime. So I think that's one of the biggest reasons. But you're right; it's very vexing that why don't we get more good photos? I would think that the day's coming we're going to get something that's undeniable, a daylight sighting right over somebody's head, unless we get that electromagnetic effect that shuts down electronics and shut down cars and that sort of thing.
But maybe by a pilot. Maybe a pilot will get
But
some.
did you ever think that they just don't want us to get it? If they're just that
It could be.
intelligent or that supreme, that they could shut off magnetic field, so to speak, that they don't want us to have it yet. They just don't want us to get it.
That they may be emanating a shield at a frequency that makes it stealthy to the frequencies that our cameras can currently film.
They're
makes
planting the seed, but they're not divulging everything yet, or opening, exposing everything yet.
I
possible.
think when they're seen, I think it's a mistake. They make a mistake somehow for some reason
Makes
because
sense.
the majority of the sightings are in the dark.
Yeah. My skin and hair has been standing up for an hour and a half now.
Yeah, I mean,
over and over. Is that anybody else?
It's just fascinating.
So weird.
And to find out somebody who's so knowledgeable about a subject matter, and some subject matter is this, man. It's just, I don't know. I obviously you got thick skin because I'm sure there's times you get ridiculed
From your own family. I bet your own
ridiculed
family.
and made you guys crazy. All these things that people who are outside the box, you're gonna get it.
In fact, the opposite has happened. Some people that I've worked with have said, "I got some breadcrumbs for you. You need to watch this
From
or
the
do
base.
this,
Oh, beautiful.
or talk to
Beautiful.
this." my family has been terrific about it. Initially, my older son is way into it, but my younger son is a little bit more technical, and he's now a medical doctor. And it turns out he didn't really want to hear a lot about it. Well, he went to a vineyard that was owned by the Laguna brothers, and the Laguna brothers have a TV show called Oak Island. Have you guys heard about Oak Island? Well, it's a discovery show about a treasure that's been there for 200 years. So my younger son is doing that, and he mentions his name, and they say something like Szymanski. That name is very familiar. And my son goes, yeah, my dad's a UFO guy, and he writes a UFO book. And they go, that's it. And he left a book here last year for the Laguna brothers. And my son goes, oh, he did? And that's what I did. I visited the vineyard. And so Rick and Marty Laguna, I signed a book over and left him. And they said, oh, that's your dad. That's so cool. Now, suddenly, his dad is cool.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, no, I
Turned
agree.
around, haven't they?
But, the other question is, and this is a silly question, but I'm gonna make it silly. But think about it. If they have sightings here, and there's been spots around the world, on all continents, I'm assuming.
Absolutely.
Right? But you never hear of them like settling in Tuscany, man, in the vineyards, and you talk about the vineyards, and hey,
Just like hiding out in a
drink some
cave.
wine, man. That's, if you're gonna stop, why not? Tuscany is beautiful as you can get, right?
Yeah. They seem to like the ugly places more than the
we
pretty
don't
places.
know. I mean, look, I'm making jokes now, of course, but I'm not. I'm serious. They come to places like you said, or deserts. They're out in land, parts of the country like Colorado or New Mexico that are desolate areas.
Either that, or that's the only time we see them.
That's
Are
true,
in those
that's true,
desolate
that's true.
areas, and when they screw up,
If
is
you
what
look-
you're
That's
saying.
usually right. We see them when they screw up, but if the desolate areas, because maybe that's easier for them to.
No,
Get
there are reports from all over the world. Every particular vineyard, microbrewery, they have been everywhere. And I think the big sightings, get the publicity like Roswell because it's the desert. But 1997, the Phoenix Lights was literally over the city of Phoenix, over the airport,
right, you
a
said.
2-mile wide. So there's a huge city area that they appear.
And we had a sighting here in Liberty, which is outside of Youngstown, the suburb, the north side. What was it? What year was that? 2000?
1994.
Oh, 94. I'm sorry.
December
25
15th
years.
December 15th, 1994.
94. And
guess what he's investigating right now, right?
Liberty UFO sighting. I went down to the police station
and he's
today.
in the was he sergeant, captain, and what is he?
Now he's the
Sergeant.
chief.
Chief.
He
the
was a
chief.
sergeant at the time.
And he's still running. And he talks about it. He has no problem talking about it.
You're talking about Chief, which is really strange to say. Chief Toby Malero was the key witness
Right.
to the sighting. He said it was a craft, silvery, 300-foot wide. It lit up the area that he was standing on like daylight. He chased it. It shut his car off.
Yeah.
Turned his car back on magically without him using the ignition, and he followed around for several miles. It was seen by
Others.
12
Right.
different municipalities, chased by cops into Pennsylvania.
So the chief Toby doesn't have a problem talking about it.
Chief Toby, unfortunately, was on vacation this week. He's going to call me back
No,
next
but
week.
I'm saying if you
He's
talk to
been
him,
in the
he'll
past.
talk to you.
He's on
about
the
it.
record
He's
about
not.
it.
He's on-
He's on the
oh,
record.
he's on
about
the
it.
record?
He's not gonna say no. I don't want to talk.
That's
about
why
it.
he knows so much about it,
That's what I
because
mean.
you've read about it.
Right.
I read about it and seen all the documentaries, and now Toby may not be talking today because he's a chief.
Yeah.
But when he calls me next week, if return my call, Toby.
There you go.
Toby, do the right.
Toby,
Chief,
I'm
Chief,
delighted-
do
I
the
wanna
right thing.
talk to you.
Do the right thing, Chief.
Yeah.
Do the right thing.
Yeah,
We all want to know more about the Liberty. They chose Liberty for what reason? Liberty, not Strutters, or
Could've become
or
a Strutter.
Camel Ohio, not
Yeah.
Boardman, or Paul.
They probably couldn't pronounce Camel correctly and
Clanfield. Or
messed
they
the whole
didn't,
thing
they didn't
up.
go out to Clanfield either.
No.
Why?
Not Lowville.
No,
They didn't go to Steubenville.
No, they didn't.
No Steubenville sighting.
If you're from this area, you don't. Would you say Clanfield? You heard me. Yes, and that's no knock on the people. It's Anyhow, no, I love the people. Come on, it's my home, man. All of it.
The views of Ray
All of you.
Mancini do not directly respect.
My wife tells me, she says, "You better quit saying it." There's a lot of people that are fans of yours. They're going to quit saying it.
That's true.
I'm not talking about the people. Just talking about the area. It's like Area 54. Was that 54?
51.
51.
Studio 54.
It's like a lot of strange stuff out there. Clanfield has a lot of strange stuff going on out there, man. Anyhow, Ray, I can't think. Man, honest to God, this was one of the most enjoyable shows. Honest to God.
Thank you so
You're
much.
a
It was a
fascinating
pleasure.
man. Fascinating man, and I hope we can have you back.
Please.
Yeah, we got to. Your story's got to be told, and when you talk to somebody like you, and you say, "Well, no, it's got to be true," because this guy's supremely intelligent. And he's got himself together, and he's just not. And you're talking about documented facts, and it's just fascinating stuff to me. So, Mike,
I'm done. All my questions have been answered.
Well,
Awesome.
anybody you out to watch it, and Brad, you watch this, man. Tell your friends. Write about it, Brad. Write about it, and you're gonna talk the boxer and the boxer and the aliens. Yeah, make some stuff.
Possible.
Hey, that's a hell of a movie. That's the name of a movie right there.
I saw the latest
Yeah.
Men in Black trailers. I know.
Boxer
They got
and
the
aliens.
NBA at the pulse.
But anyhow, I enjoyed this. This has been my favorite show, man, by far. Well, not Ed O'Neill was pretty good too, but this is by far.
He's all right.
Anyhow, well, ladies and gentlemen, I can't thank you enough for listening. If you're intrigued, if you enjoyed it, and you're intrigued by the show or anything else, please tell your friends. We'll be back again next week. I don't know if we'll have a show as good as this, but we'll be damn well try.
Yeah.
Next Tuesday around the same time. But until then, take care of each other, love each other. Good night, and God bless.